Death of a King, the new book by New York Times bestselling author and PBS television host Tavis Smiley. I'm Michael Reel, and this is ReelUrbanNews.com. Join us for an insightful and provocative conversation.
Many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And this is what we are faced with. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around.
Year of Dr. King's life. The name of the book is Death of a King, the real story of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s final year. It brings to light the turbulent last year of Dr. King's life that many of us may not really know too much about.
What I can tell you is that for 50 years of my life, I've been black every one of those years, and I know what it's like to try to navigate life in this country as an African-American man.
All right, here comes sir. Semi X, semi 2, semi 1. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Roll it, stay tracking. 15 attacks.
So your new book, Death of a King, reads like you were there.
I'm glad to hear that. I hope it reads like you were there. It's one of those stories, one of those narratives that I think that the American people need to be more familiar with. We think of Dr. King as giving this great speech, I Have a Dream, at the 1963 March on Washington, and King dies far too young. He's dead at the age of 39, assassinated, of course. But he does live 5 years after the March on Washington, I Have a Dream speech. And the real question is, what kind of man has Martin become in the last year of his life? When he comes out against the Vietnam War and everybody and everything turns against him, how does he get up every day and continue to tell his truth and navigate himself through the kind of hell and hate that was coming at him every day? So if you think of King as frozen in this frame of I Have a Dream, then you really don't know who he really was. And we all come to know who we are, Michael, in the dark and difficult days of our lives. When things are going good, it's all good.
Right.
But in the dark days, we get to know who we are. And if you think you know King, but you don't know how King had to navigate the darkest period of his life, which happened to be for him the last year of his life, then you don't really know King. And this book, Death of a King, gets you inside of the space that Dr. King was occupying in the last year when he was no longer accepted and regarded and loved and honored and revered. It's a very different Martin in the last year of his life.
Why does history lock him into the mall in Washington?
History locks him in because that's the narrative we want to tell. We shall overcome, and I have a dream. It's a narrative that doesn't upset too many people, doesn't upset the status quo. In that very speech, the I Have a Dream speech, the first part of the speech, Martin is coming hard at America. He's telling America, you've written the Negro a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. And so we've come to the nation's capital today to cash this check, which upon demand will give us the riches of freedom and the security of justice. He starts out going hard at America, and this is the very same speech. I'm not talking about all the other stuff he said after that and for the next 5 years. Just in that one speech, he's challenging America, but the part that we love to play on network television is I have a dream. I have a dream. I have a dream. So we freeze him as this sort of dreamer. And I argue in this book, Death of a King, that his martyrdom in many ways has undermined his message. We see him as this great American icon, martyred, assassinated, but the martyrdom keeps us away from getting to the real deal of what the message was. And the message, as he put it, was about what he called the triple threat facing this country. The triple threat facing America: racism, poverty, and militarism. Racism, poverty, and militarism. And all these years later, we still fighting those same fights.
So as we cut across these chapters, and we look at modern today, we're still facing the challenge of racism. We're seeing black boys' lives dashed instantly. And we have America, at least black America, crying out. Where are we now?
Well, we're the same place that Martin left us, sadly. You talk about racism and poverty and militarism, that triple threat that Martin spoke of. With regard to racism, it's clear that racism is still the most intractable issue in this country. Witness all the protests in the streets right now about the way that cops too often view black men as boogeymen. They come at us with these preconceived notions, number one. So racism is alive and well. In every other aspect of our human endeavor, the disparity by race in this country, whether you're talking economics or health or education, down the line, race is still the most divisive issue in this country, number one, all these years later. When it comes to poverty, poverty is threatening our very democracy.
And you've been a voice.
I've been trying to raise that issue for a lot of years, but poverty is threatening our very democracy. It's now a matter of national security. Black people have lost more wealth in the last 10 years than all the years of our existence in this country. I mean, so poverty is not just black people, but poverty writ large is, again, threatening our very democracy. In our country now, there's a highway into poverty, but barely a sidewalk out. So poverty is real. And on militarism, we ain't even going to talk about that. I mean, the growth of the military-industrial complex is so off the charts that King wouldn't even recognize. If he was critiquing American expansionism and American military might and muscle 50 years ago, what might he be saying now about the size of our military and the hubris and the arrogance with which too often we move around the world doing as we wish?
When we look at the challenges that we face in our black communities, do you think King would still have his nonviolent stance?
Good question. Would King still be for nonviolence? The answer in a word, yes. For King, nonviolence was the only answer. And in this book, Death of a King, you'll read, as you have, about the back and forth conversation that he and Stokely had all the time, Stokely Carmichael, about the power that Martin thought was pregnant inside of this notion of nonviolence, Satya Graha, and Stokely saw it a different way. Stokely was all for black power. And so in the last year of Martin's life, black folk in 67, 68, the last year of his existence, they don't want to hear about nonviolence, to your question. They want to hear about black power. And King said that black power is a slogan, it's not a solution. It's a slogan, it's not a strategy. And so King loved Stokely, and they loved each other, disagreed on this notion of violence versus nonviolence. But at the end of the day, Martin made it clear that the only thing that we've done in this country that has worked is nonviolence. It worked in Montgomery on the bus boycott.
Right.
It worked to get the Voting Rights Act passed. The Civil Rights Act passed. It worked at the March on Washington. I mean, so Martin had, the evidence that his strategy of acting nonviolently was the only answer. Now, what you see on the television screens every time you turn on TV right about now is a hopelessness that people have. And that hopelessness, I think, is born in part of the exhaustion that people have for continuing to fight fights that we thought we'd already won. But here again, racism, poverty, and militarism still threatening our democracy.
Very much alive. As we close, what do you want the reader to take away from your latest book, Death of a King?
Dr. King, to my mind, is the greatest democratic public intellectual, small d, the greatest small d democratic public intellectual our country's ever known. To my mind, Michael, I even go a step further, it's my own personal bias, but I think the King may very well be the greatest American we've ever produced, period. That's my assessment, the greatest American ever. So whether one agrees or disagrees, you have to agree, I think he is our greatest democratic public intellectual. And if you believe that, and you only know a part of his story, then you need to educate yourself about the rest of the story. And the rest of the story is that when King comes out against the war in Vietnam on April 4, 1967, and calls America the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, and talks about that triple threat of racism, poverty, militarism, that's April 4, 67. They kill him 1 year to the day later, April 4, 68. And this book is about the last year, literally, April 4, 67, April 4, 68. What happens to King in the last year of his life when everybody and everything turns on him? When the cosmos shifts against him? How does Martin get up and continue to tell the truth anyway? So here's the final point. This book is not just a look back at the history of Martin's last year, although it is. There's a lesson to draw from that.
Sure.
And the lesson, Michael, is simply this, that there's a huge price to pay when we ignore our truth tellers. And there are people amongst us today trying to tell us the truth about racism, and about poverty, and about militarism, and about immigration, and about a drone program on steroids, and about climate change and global warming. There are truths being told, inconvenient, uncomfortable, unsettling, that we don't want to hear. But when we ignore these truth tellers, just like when we ignore Dr. King, our society pays a price for that long term. What am I saying? That we got to be committed to telling the truth. And I've learned in my own life that there's a huge price to pay for telling the truth, but there is a greater price to pay for living a lie.
My dear friend, Tavis Smiley, author of the new book, Death of a King. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael Real. Appreciate it.
How's the reception been?
Been good. I mean, I when I started on PBS almost 12 years ago, I didn't know how long I'd be here, and I never done anything for like that long.
Right.
But it's worked out. I mean, I think people are open these days to seeing the world through a different prism.
Sure.
Not everybody, but a lot of people. PBS has a really bright, educated,
Sure.
audience. So they're curious. That's what I want. They're curious audience. So they're curious. They don't mind having their assumptions re-examined, or their presuppositions challenged. Those things don't bother them. So it's for me, it's about again challenging folks to re-examine the assumptions they hold, helping people to expand their inventory of ideas, using this platform to introduce viewers to people they otherwise wouldn't get a chance to meet. I know there are a lot of folks that if they weren't on my show on PBS, they'd never be on PBS.
They wouldn't be on.
So my point is that you expose the audience to people and to ideas and to ways of life that they wouldn't even consider. So I just feel like it's a ministry for me. I enjoy it.
What I like about it is, I was talking to Virgil Roberts earlier today, who you know, I mean, he just had nothing but praise for you.
Yeah.
People love you.
Yeah, I don't know about all that now. I can't.
You ain't respect you. You ain't been online lately. I just knew you ain't been online.
No, I feel very fortunate that people respect the work. And for me, I'm much more concerned about being respected than about being liked. Because sometimes the truth makes people uncomfortable. And not to say that I have a monopoly on the truth, and I'm not right about everything, that I see the world in the way that I see it, and I try to offer people a perspective that they might not hear someplace else. But at the end of the day, it's not about being liked. As I said to you earlier, there's a price to pay for telling the truth. There's a greater price to pay for living a lie. I just don't want to live a lie, and I can put the truth out as I see it. There is the truth, and then there's the way to the truth. And I don't ever want to demonize people who haven't arrived at the same place that I've arrived at because they're on their way there. But I think that you put the truth out there, my mother said all the time, the truth don't need no defense.
Right.
You put the truth out there, it is what it is. And if people respect you for it, okay. If they disagree, that's okay. My mama's going to agree with me on everything.
Right.
But ultimately, it's about just trying to put something out there for public consumption. So yeah.
Thank you for being generous.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
I still have a dream. It is a dream rooted in the American. I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up.
I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. Change gon' come. No, change gon' come.
I still have a dream. It is a dream in the American. I have a dream. One day, this nation